I just met the fellow that was on the board of Ridges, and he lives in a senior living center in Sister Bay. I said, "You notice I didn't use your name." He says, "That's good." A great guy, and he and his wife came from Plymouth, where I live, and he worked for Sargento Foods for years and years. Anyway, isn't this kind of cozy in here? To be completely surrounded by wood, a lot of it touched by human hands. Each square inch is different than the next. Now, picture this if this was all drywall, with drywalls all the way around. Ceiling, where almost every square inch is the same. And humans lived in this kind of space a lot longer than they lived in drywall spaces. And it's my idea that humans are kind of like let's say a leopard in a zoo. If you've ever seen a leopard in a zoo inside, it's going back and forth in front of the big plate glass window. And he was born there, and he doesn't know anything about Africa or the savannah or about tackling zebras, and all he knows is something's not right with this scene. Look at all those humans out there looking at me through the glass, and he's going back and forth, and he's back and forth, and he's so frustrated, but he doesn't know why he's frustrated. And then transfer that, if you were that leopard or that cheetah, you were born in the hospital, and you really didn't know. This might be the very first time you've ever been in a log barn before. You know, and what are you thinking about as you stand here, as you look around? Does this feel like coming home, maybe? A little bit, just a little bit. Like, I know you're not going to run out and try to buy one of these places and move it to your lot or something. But over the years, I've noticed that there are certain groups of folks that call me and say, "Alan, I've had this dream all my life of living in a log cabin." And they say, "I know you taught how to build log cabins, and we don't want to cut the trees and peel them and notch them and put them together. But is there some way, somewhere out there in Wisconsin or someplace, we could buy a house and move it to our lot?" And I'll go, "Thank you, Jesus." There's another log house lover that is going to be really happy. And over the years, my wife and I have helped a lot of people with that dream. We even moved buildings out to Chambers Island, Washington Island, here, a bunch of them here in Door County, and especially in southern Wisconsin. We live in a finished log house that was built in 1896, and we moved it from Misery Bay Upper Michigan, and have been living in that. And so we got a Norwegian wood burning stove and split wood baskets, which I've taught lately, and surrounded ourselves with the values that we happen to have discovered over our almost 60 years together. it's not for everybody, but to realize the skills that it took to build these places, and there are very few people that can do this anymore, is something that's special. Okay, this is called a drive-through barn, and you'll find it in almost all other ethnic groups that settled here in Wisconsin, because form follows function. Another thing that Frank Lloyd Wright used to say, form follows function. It just made sense to have a building like this. One side could be built when you very first settle on the property, and as you got more prosperous and more animals, you could add another one and then put them 13 feet apart, because this forms a vortex of wind. And this is where the threshing would go, because wheat was king, and you needed a threshing floor to hand thresh the grain. And in the winter time, when the farmer had lots of time on his hands, he would open up these doors, and on a windy day, it automatically brings the breeze right through this drive-through area. And they throw the grain up in the air after they've flailed it, and the chaff blows away, and the heavy grain drops down onto a cloth. So this became a wind tunnel effect. At the same time, it became a place where he could bring a wagon full of hay right in here, because the rain is coming, and I got to keep that the hay dry. So with an emergency garage, he could come in from one side and go out the other. And these openings were cut in here at different times. He's standing on the wagon and hand forking the hand cut hay into the hayloft, and the animals are living down below, and heat goes up. So when you've got a whole room full of hay above, there's good insulation, and all you have to worry about is leaks around the windows and doors and the cracks in the logs. So this is a stove wood example. But we took this whole thing out and redid it and put it back up with new mortar as part of the restoration of Jim's barn. But it's the same material that was in there. Now, we don't know exactly what was used on the other side of this wall and why this big doorway was put in here. But we do know that farmers are always making improvements, even today. And they're adapting what's on the farm rather than tearing it down or burning it down. So maybe for a while this ended up originally being for pigs on that side, and then for firewood later on after he got tired of raising pigs. And the other side was a dairy barn, and after he built the bigger dairy barns, that might have been for young stock or for sheep. So it's adaptable, very, very smartly, and very adaptable. Now the town board doesn't like a building like this so close to the highway. But as long as Jim doesn't use it for anything business-like, he can restore it, but don't put a business in it. So they battled it for a little while at the town board meetings. So Jim put this whole restoration, all this investment in here, just for you guys to see it and look at it and study it. So he's not going to use it for anything, just to have people enjoy it.
Alan, will you talk about stovewood, what is chinking and how they did it?
Okay, Lisa, former school teacher, can you tell?
I want to wanna know, go ahead, Alan.
Okay, a lot of people call this mortar infill chinking, but it's really not chinking. The chinking are the chinks of wood that are underneath the mortar, that are jammed in there so that the mortar holds on to something. So that's how, but everyone calls it chinking. Even the company that makes this magic mortar, somewhere here we've got this is new magic mortar. It comes in a 5-gallon jug, and it's called permachink. Well, even the company knows that's not real chinking. That's daubing. But how would perma-daub sound? You know, people would say, "What is that? Perma-daub?" Well, daubing is the plastic part of the chinking process. So, magic chinking costs over $200 for a 5-gallon bucket, and there's probably over 30 5-gallon buckets used on this job. It's a lot of expense for nostalgia. And then I said, well, what are we going to do about the ceiling, Jim? He was parking his car in here in the winter time, and he had a bunch of plastic hanging along there to keep the bird droppings from getting on his car. And he said, well, we've got to have some kind of a ceiling. Well, let's do it in logs. So these aren't original, and those are obviously fresh new boards cut on a circle saw. But it stays in the same kind of feeling. They'll never turn gray like on the outside. Maybe we should spray that with some kind of a stain.
How are they fit together so tight?
These are overlapped.
There's 2 layers. So there's no cracks that are directly visible because there's 2 layers of slab wood. These logs are again arborvitae, white cedar. One of the problems with working with these kind of logs, cedar trees normally are not perfectly straight. For some reason, they bend. But that's okay. The upstairs isn't chinked because they wanted the hay to dry with the air. But just the lower area has got the mortar in it because of the animals.
Alan, so earlier you had spoken about how the insulating properties of wood can actually help make it warm. And when I put my hand on the mortar, it feels cool, like stone might.
Yeah.
But the wood is so much warmer. It's
right.
Really, really nice.
Yeah. The more chinking mortar, the less cozy and warm it is. The very first log cabin that my wife and I made from scratch, we felled the trees and peeled them and put them up. We had just enough trees to make the cabin. And in fact, it kind of got small. And people looked at it and said, what's all those areas between the logs? Look at all the mortar he put in there. And I said, well, the bigger the chinking, the fewer the trees you need, basically, when you're building it from scratch. That's a factor. We went out with a clipboard in our forest. This is a good tree. We'll take one more tree. Just had enough.
Alan, will you tell the story about how you dig a hole in the ground, grind the limestone?
Oh, okay. Sure. Getting back to Emma Tuft, her grandfather and father made lime and sold it. Well, about 1,000 years ago, the Romans discovered that you can make mortar out of limestone. If you grind it up, or break it up into chunks, small chunks, and put enough heat underneath it, you will drive the oxygen out of the rock. And you end up with pure calcium carbonate, well, which is lime. Most of you worked with plaster Paris in school or something. That's pure lime. You just add water. Well, this old chinking that's in here is called slacked lime mortar. And the slacking is the process of mixing sand and water and pure lime, the powder, looks like flour, in a big hole in the ground. You mix those three things together and cover it with straw, and overnight it starts to heat up, because as soon as you add water to pure lime, it automatically wants to turn back into a stone. It's grabbing the oxygen out of the water, the oxygen molecules, and combining it with calcium and heat. Remember when you used plaster Paris, how hot it got when it was setting up? That's that chemical reaction. The same thing happened here, and they had it overnight covered with straw, and then the next day they would continue to either add more water or use it ready to go. So that was a lot of work. Again, the lime kilns were right there on Tufts Point near Bailey's Harbor, and that lime came from the Niagara limestone that's all over Door County. I was thinking this morning, if the glacier wouldn't have been so heavy that carved out the Green Bay and Kangaroo Lake and some of these other lakes like Lake Winnebago, we wouldn't have Green Bay, we would have had Green Lake. Because the Niagara escarpment that we're standing on, this layer of Niagara limestone, continues off the end of the tip of Door County, goes under the water, and then comes up in the state of Michigan, called the Gardner Peninsula. And at one time they could have been touching together, so you'd have Green Lake instead of Green Bay. Think about that. Holy cow. The glacier, I'm not going to talk about climate change, but there's something to do with the glacier. Something's going on with that. Anyway, so that's lime. And the stone in Jim's barn, that's all slack lime. And you notice that it's got kind of a little buff color to it over there. That's because they took the sand out of the area here when it's not washed. There's a little bit of soil, a little buff color in there. So the builder of that barn didn't use pure sand, washed sand, where over here it's white rather than buff. But anyway, that would be two different builders. So sand, lime, and water. Boy.
Is that still used today?
No.
Yes.
Portland cement was invented and completely replaced an arduous process of making mortar for construction. Cement is Portland cement, different process, much harder. Any other questions? Oh, the corner notching. A lot of people say you can tell what ethnic group built the building by the corner notches. Well, it's sort of true. These corner notches are what's called a half dovetail, and that was generally done by the Bohemians and the Germans. The full dovetail were done by the Scandinavian groups. So there is generally a rule of thumb that a half dovetail, every other horizontal surface is level on a corner notch, and they're interconnected. Some of these on the northwest corner, you'll notice when you walk around there, there's a bunch of these corner notches that weren't trimmed off. That's very unusual. On the other side of this building, take a look, and they're crude. They're just sticking out in the air. Now, that's very interesting to see that, because a farmer would have left that there for some reason. Most of us would say, what are you leaving those things hanging out there for? Trim it off like the rest of the wall. But he definitely had a reason for that. And until this morning, I didn't know that reason. But a gentleman brought a picture, and that one in their oval picture frame. And there's the reason. There's an attached wing, and those were used to hold the attached wing, which is missing now, tight to the wall.
Long for future construction.
Yeah, for future. He had in mind, I'm going to put a shed on here, and I want to tie it in. And that's why that was there. Any other questions? Log buildings. Oh, let me kind of close with this idea. Over the years, when my wife and I would come and meet with Jim and Phyllis, Phyllis announced to me, she said, Alan, you should move up here to Door County. Let's form a log cabin society right here in Door County. I said, Phyllis, that's an incredible idea. But I'm working at Old World, Wisconsin. It's a long way to drive. And then the farm next door came up for sale. I couldn't get my wife to drive 2 hours to work. But for $35,000, I could have had an 80-acre farm right next to Jim Ingwersen, and I'm an artist, and I'm too, and I would have been an understudy of Jim all these years, living, and the farm I've got it drawn here. It's better. It was at that time better than anything we built at Old World, Wisconsin. It was all original stovewood log buildings, and over the years, whoever bought it tore down some of the buildings. But there is a drive-through log barn just like this on the farm next door, and the house is a log house too, like Jim's. But anyway, you get those opportunities in your lifetime, and a fork comes along, you take it, be up in beautiful Door County, and learn how to paint, look like Jim Ingwersen. But that's another chapter for another time. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here.